But look, at the end of the day, I do think that this rape inquiry that we did see just come out recently by Restore Britain, which again, as you mentioned, they were the ones who released the report. It wasn't a report released by the government, which it should have been. It was a report released by a private organization, or at least an organization that had nothing to do with the government. It was grassroots. That does affect the credibility of the report, but really what the report said and what the report released was crazy. It showed that there were, a bunch of rape inquiries that were never questioned. There were a bunch of incidents all connected to Pakistani immigrants that were just ignored and swept under the rug by many mayors across Britain, and also by eventually the government. So it was a crazy report to be released. I think that it has everything to do with the fact that Britain is continuously allowing these third world immigrants into the country. It has nothing to do with their religion of the immigrants. It has everything to do with the fact that they're third world immigrants. When you allow third world immigrants into the country, it's going to result poorly. And, if you just ignore that, then you're not going to have a successful country. Look, we interviewed a British politician or a British activist on the show a few months back, and what he said was very true, that, Nigerian Christians that come into the country are just as much of an issue as Pakistani Muslims, because it's not about the religion, it's not about the type of person, it's everything about third world immigration and the fact that they're from the third world, which means that they have a much more difficult time to assimilate into the UK, to contribute to the workforce and everything. Ofer, though, in general, what are your thoughts on specifically what is up to move forward? I mean, in the US, we saw this movement where we made deportations popular, where we made illegal immigration basically non-existent in our country now. What is going to happen, though, to countries like the UK, where illegal immigration is bound to happen, or at least this constant trend of allowing refugees to come into the country is bound to happen?
Yeah, so there is some good news on that front because under Keir Starmer, surprisingly, we've seen net negative migration for the first time in years. And that's because even though he's left wing, even though he himself was a human rights lawyer who fought for refugees when he was a private citizen, right now the situation politically is just unfeasible. So there's so much pressure on him that he actually was able to deport some individuals that overstayed their visas or committed crimes. And he did that in conjunction with third parties. The Conservative Party had the entire Rwanda scheme that never really set off. And so, yeah, the Labour Party was actually overseeing for the past year and a half, net negative migration. But that does not solve the fundamental issue, which is the fact that there are still a lot of people that were here that came during the Boris wave, as I refer to it. That's the wave of immigration that spanned from about 2019 to 2021. And a lot of it happened during COVID, which is the most surprising part, where everybody was supposed to be at home. We brought in more people. And it was people from all over the third world. We're looking at Nigerians primarily, but also a lot of Ugandans and people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, et cetera, et cetera. And they just flooded the country during that time period and fundamentally changed the demographics, people that then ended up going on welfare, social housing, and ended up being a burden on the economy during a time where already we had a lot of financial strain for the UK because they were dealing with all the people that were in senior care and had dependencies. So you have an issue with the NHS, which completely broke down because, again, wait times started to increase. There was a heavier load because you have more people and they're always coming in and out and taking advantage of the system. And they're also sending remittances back to their families, understandably. I would do the same thing if I were there in their position. But that means that they're not contributing as much to the country when it comes to the tax base. So a lot of these immigrants, people talk about them being economic immigrants and that being important for the economy, which I understand at a fundamental level because, for instance, the Polish immigrants that came in during the EU period when the UK was back in the European Union, or the Romanian workers, like they were very important in the construction industry, for instance, or in the pharmaceutical industry. They ended up contributing. But in this case, if you run the numbers between the tax burden paid or payroll taxes compared to what they take in from welfare or from sending to their families, it's a net drain on the country. They're not contributing. And in addition to that, they're committing crimes, which is even worse. They're committing these entirely salacious stories. We're talking here about gang rapes by huge groups of young men that prey on individual young white girls, British girls. And it's disgusting how the police officers call them prostitutes and just try to basically throw under the bus like that and laugh at them. And they did everything they could to avoid inflaming racial tensions. That's the really underlying issue here. And they cared more about trying to keep a group happy that was trying to overrun the country, abuse, and take advantage of the system, rather than confronting the issue head on and calling spade to spade. And whenever you have that sort of cowardice, it leads to these sorts of consequences where people suffer at a large scale. So I'm wondering, do you think that Labour under Andy Burnham, who's now almost certainly going to be the next prime minister, do you think they're going to have some sort of course correction, or are they going to continue basically on the same path that Keir Starmer's taking, which is very middle of the road?
Yeah, I actually think that they will not continue on the same path. It's going to be the opposite. They're going to just become more radical. That's what we have seen in general. The progressive movement all around the world, not only in the United States, has always become more radical because they don't understand how to attract more people. They don't understand how to become more center because their policies are already pretty radical to begin with. So their option is either to not become a party based off their original principles, or it's to become a party based off their original principles only and become a fundamentalist party. And when you have a fundamentalist party, then you have a very radical party. And that's probably what will happen in the UK with the Labour Party. I want to, go back to something that JD Vance actually said in the very beginning of his term as vice president when he went into Europe. He delivered a wonderful speech. And what he said was that Europe and America, yes, we are allies, but that does not mean we always have to be aligned. And that is very, very, very true in this case. We have seen that while the European allies in general, including the UK, including France, I would put Spain in there, but Spain is becoming communist now. We have seen that European allies have continuously, including the UK, they have a mentality that when you have big government, it is good. It means that the people are protected. It means that when you have big government, that we don't have any sort of situation like we would in Nazi Germany, for example, where democracy failed us, where democracy, according to how the UK viewed it, democracy failed the entire Western world and caused for millions to die, and obviously World War II. The US views it completely differently. The US views democracy as the number one pillar here, as the thing that has prevented the collapse of the collapse of all of the Western world. Democracy is the thing that fights against tyranny, and it works. And World War II is an example of how democracy prevails. So this fundamental difference in how European allies and American allies view the world is one of the main reasons why we are never going to be 100% aligned with our European allies, including the UK. And it's also why the UK will always be more left-leaning, because the Democrats in general and the progressive movement is a big fan of bigger government. It is always a fan of bigger government. They don't have the same fundamental distrust that the right does. And this is very reflective of what's going on right now in the situation with the UK, where we see that big government is promoted, where we see that ideas like having mass immigration, mass third world immigration is promoted. Again, these are all values that aren't necessarily the values that democracy always prevails, but instead that big government prevails. And Ofer, I want to mention one last point here, which is what you mentioned with immigration in general, and specifically how it contributes to the workforce. The UK is actually an outlier here, because third world immigration for countries like France has contributed to the workforce and economic output consistently, and it still actually does. The main difference here, though, is that in the UK, third world immigration drains resources, and also their kids tend to not assimilate. That's the main difference, and it's similar in France. But the difference here that we have in France is that third world immigration tends to actually benefit economically the country. In the UK, they just don't have that. So I want to ask you, I mean, if you were in the UK right now, obviously third world immigration, banning it or putting an end to it, that would be the first step. But what comes after? Because we can't leave the economic situation in the UK as it is now. There are a declining population. It's declining on a rate never seen before. People are leaving the UK. And in general, what other option is there other than immigration?
Yeah, so that's a very good point, and it's one that is salient not just for the UK, but we've talked a lot about it in the context of the US. For the UK, it's worse though, because their replacement rates, especially for native Britons,
Yeah.
is far lower than it is for white Americans. And so, just to give a bit of context, more than 500,000 British citizens left the country in recent years, going to Spain or to the UAE. those people are high human capital. Like those are people that are involved in crypto or are somehow involved in entrepreneurship. Those people can be attracted back if there are proper incentives. And those people will be far better off as citizens, model citizens that can contribute to the economy compared to some of the people that we've been talking about now in the grooming scandal. Because think about it like this. I've been looking at the platform of Restore Britain, which is the party that published this report about the grooming gangs. And they talked about deporting not just the people that were involved in the entire assault on the children, but also the families of those people that protected them. Because within cultures in the Indian subcontinent, like India and Pakistan, there is a cultural mode that is called izat. That's what it's referred to. And it's basically putting an emphasis on the honor of the family above anything else. And so, within the context of the grooming scandals, what that meant is that there was no way that they would report about their children doing that to the police because it would bring disgrace to the family and it would lower them in the social rankings. So they protected one another, and you fundamentally are not able to operate within a Western democracy in a system where you have pluralistic markets with private property rights when you have a culture like that. It's not compatible. And so there has to be more to be done to remove those people, especially ones that knew about the scandal and said nothing. I think those people have no right to be there, regardless of whatever citizen status they have. And in the UK, it's easier to revoke it than it is in the US, so they can think about that. But also, you're right that there have to be people that work. People have to do construction. People have to be in energy. Those have to be revitalized. So bring people in that left in recent years, even if you need to, bring in people from the EU, from Romania and Poland. Those people, like Henry Novak, who was killed by that Sikh individual, like those are people that actually are willing to acclimate into the culture and they love the country and they are willing to work and actually are a net positive. So perhaps not ideal, you prefer everybody be British, but it's not practically possible. And so the next best option is to bring in people from Europe. And definitely don't bring any more people in from Africa, Indian subcontinent, from the Caribbean, because that happened in the 70s. And that's the correct course, but it has to be paired with also reindustrializing the UK,